Good evening,
Namaskar.
Bhante.
Good evening. Namaskar.
Namaste. So you got a very nice big photograph in the background, Dharma.
Yeah,
And
my granddaughter fixed it like that.
is she?
Background. Yeah,
That's very nice.
yeah, yeah.
Is your
Thank you.
granddaughter with you?
No, not they have hard. We have hard time to catch them because they
Very
are so
nice.
busy all the time. Yeah, yeah. She came one day and she did background like that. No.
Great,
Uh,
nice photo.
okay, so good evening, everyone, and good evening, Bhante. So I think, further ado, I will pass this platform to Bhante to give us practice and Dharma. Good evening, Bhante.
Thank you for the invitation. Peace and joy to everybody. I'm just wondering if there's any questions before we practice sitting. If there's any questions about the actual practice. I must have frightened her. Okay. Let's give it a couple of more minutes. People are always a bit late.
We have, after a few days, a few weeks, David also joined with us.
Can you hear me, Ashan?
Yes, we hear you.
Yeah, we can hear you. We can hear
My
you.
apologies. I've been away and with internet somewhat unstable, I wasn't able to join.
Oh. Yeah, by the way, my internet is a little unstable. We don't quite know what it is. Sometimes it just cuts, and then a couple of minutes later, well, even half a minute, it comes back on.
Mm-hmm.
And we've had the whole place rewired. So we can actually, before the rewiring, we could only take 1 gigabyte a minute, 1 gigabyte a second. I think that's it. And now it's 10 gigabyte a second. But it doesn't seem to stop the problem. So we'll see. It's a case of a local company who gave great service, sold out to a national company, and the whole thing begins to collapse. You know, it's just so regular, isn't it? Just so regular. You look like an Old Testament prophet, Charlie.
Yeah, I've heard a lot of things like that. Some people say I look like Santa Claus. I mean,
That's a great old beard.
yeah, thank you.
So, okay, just a little reminder. Remember, you can't force concentration. You know, if you have a knitted brow trying to concentrate, all you get is restless. It comes about through relaxing, just relaxing on the sensations, just allowing those sensations to be just there, and to raise a sense of interest if it's Vipassana. If you don't raise a sense of interest, then the meditation becomes a samatha, becomes a concentration meditation, which is fine, but there's not much insight in that. So you've got to raise a certain question mark in the mind. It's an attitude. It's an attitude of inquiry, an attitude of curiosity. That's what you want. Yeah. And then as you feel yourself more and more settled on the breath, you can allow yourself to go to whatever draws your attention, whether it's a sensation, that a pain in the knee or something, or whether it's an emotion that's come up for you. Yeah. If it's a thought, you You sort of note what the thought is doing. Is it planning? Is it worrying? And so on. And that tells you there must be something going on in the heart. You come back in the body, contact the heart, see if you can stay there with it. Be open to it, you see. And if it's a difficult emotion, to hold it with a sense of kindness, you know, as if you're attending, like a nurse. Oh, somebody's got there. Okay, as if you're attending, like a nurse attending a patient. You're attending to it. Okay, so have an attitude. No, you don't. It's not an attitude of wanting to get rid of it. It's an attitude of totally accepting it and allowing the heart to express itself. You see, and magically, that's how the heart heals. Okay. I want my, let's see the chat line. There's a chat line there. I want my inner self absolutely in a state of total quiet mind. Well, the problem with that is you'll be fighting the mind to try and get it to be quiet. And that just ends up to be a great big struggle. It's much better to have the idea of watching the mind, of being aware of what the mind's doing, like an unruly child, a 2-year-old running around, making a mess, and you just wait till he gets tired, you see. But if you try and subdue it, it gets angry, and then it goes all over the place. So it's not that we want a totally quiet mind. We want to find a position where we can allow the psychophysical organism to express itself. And the body expresses itself in sensations and feelings, and the heart in moods and emotions, and the mind in thoughts and images. And that's it. That's all there is, right? And these combine to create a story, and we get caught up in it. So we're always stepping out of the story, just watching what's there. That's all. Yeah. Okay. So let's do the refuge and precepts. Oh yeah, I'm supposed to put that on, aren't I? To share that with you. Here we go. Okay, I'll just go through the refuges and precepts with you. I'll share the screen. Where is it? Here we are. Okay, hopefully you can all see that. Yeah. And I'll scroll it down. When we get to the Sikkhapada. Okay, so remember, when you're bowing, it's an expression. It's an expression of surrender, giving in. The spiritual life always generally tells us to do what we don't want to do, you know, like we tells us not to indulge in things for a start. And when we bow to the Buddha, we're bowing to our teacher, to our exemplar, see. We're bowing to the Dharma, we're bowing to the teachings and the actual practice. So with the Buddha, it can be a sense of gratitude. To the Dharma, a sense of awe, a sense of amazement. And to the Sangha, all the people who've attained one of the paths and fruits, is a sense of gratitude as well, see. Or you can just bow. The body itself is an expression, see. Okay. Bodhang Pujami. Dhammang Pujami. Sanghang Pujami. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Bodhang saranang gacchami. Dhammang saranang gacchami. Sanghang saranang gacchami. Dutiyampi Bodhang saranang gacchami. Dutiyampi Dhammang saranang gacchami. Dutiyampi Sanghang saranang gacchami. Tatiyampi Bodhang saranang gacchami. Tatiyampi Dhammang saranang gacchami. Tatiyampi Sanghang saranang gacchami. Panati pata veramani sikapadang samadhiyami. Adina dana veramani sikapadang samadhiyami. Kame sumi chachara veramani sikapadang samadhiyami. Musawada veramani sikapadang samadhiyami. Sura Miraya Majja Pamadatana Veramani Sikapadang Samadhiyami. Tisaranena Saha Panchasilan Sadhukang Katva Appamadena Sampadeta. Having taken the refuges and precepts, the last words of the Buddha, strive diligently for your liberation. So we can sit for a little while. a moment's reflection. Just pick up on something that happened in this past time. How did you deal with it? And you formulate a determination, a resolution around it. So, for instance, if there was a lot of doziness, sleepiness, how did you deal with it? And what would be your determination the next time you sit? And opening the eyes gently. Get the right glasses. Okay. Just a minute. Namo tassa bhagavato harahato samma sambuddhassa. Homage to the Buddha, the blessed, noble, and fully self-awakened one. So I thought I would tackle fear and anxiety because I'm under the impression that there's a lot of it around, especially with this new American administration. So I thought it'd be something to have a look at and how it pans out for us. So just a little difference between fear and anxiety. Fear is understood to be something which is quite short-lived, like a shock. It's something that happens to you which you're not expecting, so you get this sudden rise of fear. If you, for instance, step out on the road and a car sort of zips past you and you realize how close you were to being knocked over, then you get that sort of shock. Whereas anxiety is something which is a little bit longer. It's always moving towards the future, always afraid and worried about what's going to happen. There's also something about fear which paralyzes you. I mean, some animals actually freeze when they're being attacked. And there's a sense of coldness because everything's freezing. But with anxiety, it causes that agitation, restlessness, and it's a sort of heaty, a very hot emotion. And panic, of course, is the fear of fear. So when fear comes up and it's too much for us and we can't handle it, then you get that double take and off you go. You're in a state of panic. So in order to work with this, we have to get right down to the root of where fear arises. And it won't come as a surprise that it arises with that sense of self. So it's all to do with identity. And we mistakenly identify with this form, name and form, this psychophysical organism. And early on in life, we become aware of death. Children are fascinated by dead animals. And I think, as happened with the Buddha or Siddhartha Gautama at the time, somewhere in our 20s, when youth has disappeared, there does arise a much more, should we say, realization that we're heading for something really bad, sickness, aging, and death. So it's a sort of something that dawns upon us. But and at some point in our lives, of course, it hits us quite hard, either because we ourselves fall ill and we're going to die, or somebody close to us does. And then, of course, there's that whole process of death. So if you happen to be a scientific materialist, it's an annihilation, but that doesn't make it any easier, knowing that you're going to completely disappear. But if you are somebody who believes in some sort of afterlife, if it's rebirth, things like that, then one thing that the Buddha points out is that we don't know our karma. We don't know what we've done in the past, which will manifest in our next life. And I think some people, I was asking one or two people whether they believe in rebirth, whether they were looking forward to it, whether it was a good idea. And they were, you see, but they forget that it's something that's horrified. It's horrified. It's terrible because you have to go through the whole process again. At some point, you're born, you grow, and then you've got to grow old and die, and then you die. And that happens even to the gods and other beings. And when we center upon the loveliness of life, we forget the horror. See, and this is what the Buddha says. He said, to become aware of sickness, aging, and death. Remember, in the mythology that surrounds the Buddha's life, and remember, myth is a way of telling a truth. It's a story. So at some point, he becomes aware of sickness, aging, and death. A sick person, and I'm sure you know the story, and it hits him very hard. It becomes an existential crisis. And that's what drives him to try and find some sort of end to it. So from this sense of self, which knows it's uncertain, we know we're going to die. So there's an inbuilt sense of fear in the whole mechanism of the self, the whole concept of a self. And on top of that, to hide away this fear of death, we begin to collect things. We collect a load of money and a load of friends, and we have power, and we like to enjoy ourselves and go on holidays, and it's a way of sort of not looking at reality, or some of it is a way of not looking at the reality. But what we do, of course, is we form an attachment to them because these become our protectors. The more money you have in the bank, the safer you feel. The more friends you have, the more you feel loved and needed and all that sort of stuff. So, but these are false friends because they also disappear. And so underneath the attachment, there's always fear of loss. So attachment is like a bulwark. It's like a wall that we built against death. And this is what the Buddha says, you see, from attachment comes grief. I got lost. Remember the talk yesterday, last week rather. From attachment comes fear. One who is free from attachment has no grief. So how can there be fear? Okay. So once we've got a handle on that, then we have to ask, how do we overcome? How do we overcome this fear? And the first thing the Buddha asks us to do is to reflect upon it, to actually bring what I've just spoken about to mind, so that we get an insight into it. So those who are wise and full of insight do not tremble in the face of death. So this from the Sutta Nipata, you see. And one of the things that he really does push is the contemplation of death. He says that if we really do that, then it's also a path to Nibbana. Now, when we contemplate, what are we doing? Well, we're reminding ourselves. In the Visuddhimagga, for instance, it suggests that even just repeating the word death, just that word death will bring up a sense of horror, of fear at some level. I am going to die, just as just as this, you could visit a cemetery, and just as this person was alive and is now where they are, so I shall be. So there are ways of contacting the reality of what's going to happen to us. And this and the idea is that we become comfortable with it. We become comfortable with the idea that, yeah, I'm going to die. Now, the next thing is metta. So metta here acts as a sort of protector. So especially when you're sitting, if a fear comes, no matter what what you're afraid of, if that fear comes, to go towards it with a sense of care, with a sense of holding it, attending to it, as a nurse would attend a patient, and a sort of caring embrace of the fear. And, you can speak to your body, you can speak to your heart, you can say things like, dear heart, I can feel your fear, I can feel it, you see. And that allows you to be open to it, yeah, to sort of step back out of the heart, not get caught up in it, and to, from that position, to actually talk to yourself. It's a way of creating that distance, right, between the observer, the feeler, and what is being felt. And the idea is that from that position, you're much more easy to hold the fear. And the fear is just an energy, right? So that's all it is just an energy. And what it does is it picks up a story from the mind, and before you know it, it's developing itself through the story. That's how we develop our emotions, through creating stories. Yeah. So fear will create all sorts of stories about how horrible life is, there's anxiety, etc. But if you come off the mind and just stay with the raw emotion and hold it with that sense of kindness, sense of care, you're giving the heart the necessary space it needs to express it, to actually let go of it. And that's the healing process. That's how it works. If it comes up during the day, one way or another, again, you can maintain that sort of distance from it and know it to be there. And just as it were, offer yourself a certain kind of kindness, a certain care, and then get on with what you're doing. But then find some time in the evening or sometime during the day when you can just sit with it, just stay with it. And when you get to that position of just feeling it, sort of sink into it. And when you sink into it, what do you find? I think you'll find only heat, agitation. That's all it is. It's just sensation. There's nothing solid about it. It's not real in a real sense of, because when you feel it like that, there's nothing to be afraid of. You're not afraid of anything. It's just pure emotional fear. And of course, the Buddha states that, of course, somebody who develops that sort of loving kindness sleeps peacefully and is fearless. So then, of course, there is the actual Vipassana practice, which I've just, in a sense, described. And then there's just to reinforce that, in the discourse on fear and dread, that's in the Majjhima Nikaya, the Middle Length sayings. There's a passage there where a Brahmin, Janusoni, has approached the Buddha, and after some, pleasantries, how you do and all that, he says, remote jungle thickets, resting places in the forest are hard to endure. Seclusion is hard to practice, and it is hard to enjoy solitude. One would think the jungles would rob a contemplative of his mind if he has no concentration. Then the Buddha lists all these types of mental states that makes it difficult for us. So he talks about being impure in bodily conduct, what you're doing, and then verbal conduct. He says those who are covetous or full of lust, who have got full of ill will or intentions of hate, who are drowsy and sleepy, restless and unpeaceful minds. They're uncertain and doubtful, worrying. They're given to self-praise and disparagement of others, who are subject to alarm and terror, who are desirous of gain, honor, and renown, lazy and wanting energy, unmindful and not aware, unconcentrated with minds all over the place, devoid of wisdom, drivellers, idiots. All people who are dominated by these mental states would find solitude or just being on their own very difficult indeed. Now, he then says to himself, and he tells us how he dealt with this. So he said, on certain nights, auspicious nights, this is the 14th and 15th and the 8th night of the moon cycle. If I were, he says to, he's talking about, he's talking to himself. If I were to dwell in such awe-inspiring, hair-raising, horrifying abodes, like orchard shrines, woodland shrines, and tree shrines. So that tells you something about what the shrines were. They would have ghosts, etc. And of course, in the forest, there'd be wild animals. And he said, and while I dwelt there, a wild animal would come up to me, or a peacock would knock off a branch, or the wind would rustle the leaves. And I thought, what now if this is the fear and dread coming? So he's gone to a place where he hopes to be able to experience this fear and dread. Why do I dwell? And then he asks himself, why do I dwell always expecting fear and dread? What if I soothe that fear and dread while keeping the same posture that I'm in when it comes upon me? So this was his practice. I mean, he tells us exactly how he dealt with fear. While I walked, the fear and dread came upon me. I neither stood nor sat nor lay down till I had soothed the fear and dread. And while I stood, the fear and dread came upon me. I neither walked nor sat nor lay down till I had soothed the fear and dread. While I sat, the fear and dread came upon me. I neither walked nor stood nor lay down till I had soothed the fear and dread. And while I lay down, the fear and dread came upon me. I neither walked nor stood nor sat down until I had soothed the fear and dread. So in other words, when the fear and dread came, he kept on doing what he was doing with his attention entirely upon that mental state until it had, expended itself, exhausted itself. So that gives us some idea about the way the scriptures talk about fear. But there's also, and it's called the paradox of fear by some writers, there's also a good fear. So these two words come up, hieriotopa, which translates as a sort of a dread of doing something unwholesome. And hiri refers to the shame, when you're caught doing something which is unwholesome, which is immoral, which is even something which is, what would you say, embarrassing, like a slip of the tongue, or you've said something you shouldn't have said. There's that shame and dread. And for the Buddha, these two, as far as he was concerned, were protectors of the world. So how does this work, you see? So it's a case of recognizing that if I'm about to do something and there's a little voice in me saying, no, don't do that, don't do that. And I say to myself, well, if I do that, what might happen? And then if it's something which I can see is unwholesome, then it brings up a sense of fear in me of the consequences of doing that. And that becomes my guardian. So fear has actually helped me stop me from making a mistake. It's the same with shame. Shame is a loss of self-esteem, becoming a judgment by others of being an unwholesome person, or in some way seeing you more diminished. So that's when we get that sense of shame. So then when you do something and this little voice comes up and says, no, don't do that. And then you imagine yourself doing it and it goes wrong, and the shame that you will experience stops you doing it. And so again, it becomes a protector. So in this case, the Buddha is pointing out that shame can be also a friend. It's also telling us not to do certain unwholesome things. We will be fearful. Let's see. We will fear the fault pertaining to this present life. We will fear the fault pertaining to a future life, and we will be fearful of faults and see perils in faults. It is in such a way that you should train yourselves. It is to be expected that one who is fearful of faults, in other words, fearful of doing wrong, and sees peril in doing wrong, will be freed from doing wrong. And they will be fearless, because there is nothing to fear in that, and because there is no fear for one who has attained it. In other words, one who is guided by moral principle and protected by the fear and shame that might arise by doing something wholesome, is what are they to fear? So that's some of the writers seem to be very confused about that, and they've called it the paradox of fear. Okay, so we've just had a quick look at fear and anxiety, how to try to deal with them, but through contemplation and through meditation, and to recognize that some of the fear that we have is actually wholesome. They are our protectors. So I can only hope my words have been of some assistance, that they have not caused any confusion, and that by your careful practice of the Dhamma, you'll be liberated from all suffering sooner rather than later. So I don't know whether any questions or observations you'd like to say.
Thank you very much, Bhante, for the reflection and the meditation. So anyone wants to ask a question or any sharings, please unmute yourself and ask or share your thoughts. Anybody? No?
Very good. Well, it must have been a good talk then.
Bhante, can I ask you a question?
Yes. Who is it? I can't see who it is.
Dharma Sakya.
Oh, Dharma. Excuse me. Yes, right.
Yeah. Did I understand you spent some time in monastery in Japan?
In Japan?
Yeah. Was it in Japan or in UK? I don't know.
It's
in
the UK. It's in the UK. It's Throstle Hole Abbey in Northumberland.
Oh, I see. Right. Okay. I was just wondering. I was reading an article by a Jain monk who was Christian, and he was saying when you do zazen, you just sit quietly, emptying your mind, expecting something to happen, like Satori. And many Jain practitioners, nothing happens, and then leave the practice. Is that true? Is that your Bhante?
Well, no, that's really bad practice. That is such bad practice. I don't even know where to start with that.
Yeah.
If you sit to become enlightened, you're lost.
Yeah.
Completely lost. You can't make that your aim.
Yeah. It was the article written in the middle way, the Buddhist Society's magazine.
Yeah. And the man who wrote it, he was a Jaina.
Then he's a Christian. Shall I tell you the name? He was Christian. He was a Christian, Catholic, then became a Jain monk.
Well, and he's still a Zen monk, is he?
Yeah.
Well, yes. I mean, I was never taught that. I was taught exactly what you're taught in Vipassana. Just watch whatever arises and passes away, with no aim. As soon as you put an aim in your mind, right, you have a concept of where you're going. Now, the one thing that Nibbana isn't is a concept.
Yeah.
So if you attain that concept, and think it's Nibbana, you are totally deluded. Right? For instance, I'll give you an example. I had a student who came, and it's just one of those things. While he was on the toilet, he had this amazing experience, and he was absolutely certain that it was Nibbana. So I said to him, well, I said, were you aware of that experience while you were in the experience? And he said, yes. I said, well, it can't be Nibbana because there's nobody there in Nibbana. And I said, was it an emotional state? Were you really high? He said, it was absolutely beautiful. I said, there's no emotions in Nibbana. Because it can't be Nibbana. But he wouldn't believe me. He went away thinking, no, that was it. He's attained Nibbana. What can you do? I always say he was letting go, which is what you do when you're on the toilet. So he must have been, it was part of a relief.
Yeah. Thank you, Bhante.
Okay. Okay, that's good. So we can do a little meta practice just to draw our session to an end, yeah? Shall we? Okay. So if you want to use the blessings that I use, it's may you be safe from all danger, from outside and from within ourselves. May you be safe, may you be well, free of all sickness and disease. May you be happy, free of mental distress, and to develop a way of life which is more at ease, to live more contented. That's a word that we ought to contemplate, really, how to bring about contentment, to be happy with where we are. Contentment and in harmony with the world, even when the world is not such a pleasant place for us. So may you be safe, well, and happy. May you live contented in harmony with the world. Or we can bring to mind somebody who's helped us in our lives. There are those who are near and dear to us. There are friends, people at work, whomever we wish. We can bring to mind a neutral person, someone we see but don't know. We can turn that stream of goodwill and loving kindness towards ourselves. And into the heart of goodwill, we can bring someone we might be having difficulties with. Radiating outwardly, first of all, to each other, our present spiritual companions. May we to our neighbors and neighborhood. To all the people in our country. To all the peoples of Europe. And of course, if you're in America, it's all the peoples of the Americas. All people on earth. And to all beings in all directions. May all beings be happy. Sabe sata sukita hantu. Sabe sata sukita hantu. Sabe sata sukita hantu. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. So if there's something you'd like me to talk about next week, just drop me a line.
Thank you, Venerable, for the wonderful evening and the reflections. Thank you, everyone, for joining today. Remember that we have only 2 days left with Bhante. So there's 2 days available. So another 2 days. And then after that, I'm not sure when we can have him so we can learn from him. So thank you very much. And then have a good night, everyone. And we'll see you next week. Thank you.
Thank you.
Toodaloo.
Thank you, Bhante.
Thank
Ciao.
you, Bhante.
Thank you,
Thank you,
Bhante.
Bhante.
Thank you, Ajahn.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you. Have a good night.